Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are joined by Luke McCamley. He has written a new work of fiction called The Gods Who Want to Die. He's now into philosophy and is an ex-Mormon, which we're going to talk about. And the book is about a devoted mother who finds herself ensnared in a deadly conflict of faith and familial love. There's a cult, there's murder, there's death, things get crazy. It's fun times. So, welcome, Luke, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, why don't we dive right in and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wrote this book?
Sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm an ex-Mormon. I was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the UK, and was a devout believer my whole life. Had a family, got married, had children, lived I guess what's called a true blue Mormon life in every way that means. And it was around about 2014. I would have been about 35 that I experienced a real shift in perspective. I guess some people would call it a crisis of faith. I would now, looking back, I would say I began to discover things about the roots of Mormonism that I hadn't known about before. And quite quickly, my faith unraveled, and my perspective changed towards Mormonism quite considerably. And it really opened up a whole new way of thinking in lots of areas of my life. And I think the most significant change in terms of talking about the book is it really kind of unleashed me. I felt for the first time really in my life free to explore artistically any subject matter, any kind of creative endeavor that I felt I wanted to do. And so I there's that mantra, isn't there, that you should write what you know. And I reflected on my experience and the experiences that I had observed among other Mormons who'd left. And not only just within Mormonism, but looked across the kind of the landscape of. I mean, there's a big debate really about whether Mormonism is a cult, and probably not one to kind of get into today. But so I kind of looked at various similar organizations and the experiences of people who had left similar religious groups, and felt inspired to write a book that is entirely fictional, but very much driven by a satirical kind of tone and focus. I wanted to take a kind of satirical shot, really, at not at Mormonism. It's not my book isn't an attack on the Mormon Church, and it's not an attack on religion at all. But it's more of a satirical, poking fun kind of at what I call a cult mindset, or a kind of very rigid way of thinking. And so in The Gods Who Want to Die, I'm telling a story where I'm drawing heavily on those things that I've experienced in my life, and really just pushing it to extremes. So yeah, I hope that gives some context in terms of where the book kind of falls in terms of my life and and how it kind of began, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. I like how you said occult mindset. How does that manifest in the book with some of your characters?
Yeah, good question. And it manifests to the extent that in the main character, who is a devoted mother, it manifests in the way in which she is so dogmatically wedded to the cult that she belongs to, that she's prepared to go to extreme lengths to defend not only her belief, but also her devotion to her cult leader, to the extent that she's prepared to do criminal, deadly, abysmal acts that I think again have a kind of satirical feel to it. But I hope it, within the context of the book and in the context of the story, would also be plausible. And in my research for the book, it wasn't very hard to find, again, real life cases of cult followers doing just absurdly despicable things. Such is the kind of strength of their belief. And so, yeah, I was kind of exploring that with the lead character. And I think in many ways, I think because there are lots of different roles that people can play in a cult, and I'd like to think that I'm kind of representing those diversity of roles in the characters that appear in the book. So yeah, to answer your question, the main character is prepared to pretty much sacrifice everything, including her own children, for her cause, for the strength of belief that she has.
Yeah, that is what is it about faith and religion that triggers that response in people? I've always wondered that.
Me too. Yeah, that's what I find so just incredibly fascinating. And I don't know if it's the more I've thought about it, the more I've noticed that kind of rigid, dogmatic mindset, not just appearing in religion, but actually appearing in all sorts of other contexts in life and in culture and in terms of how people kind of react to various social issues and of course in politics. And so I think that's one thing that I've noticed.
Yes, the majority party in your country is dogmatically tied to policies that do not work, and they refuse to take a different course. That's another podcast, but it's always lovely to watch a party that's been in power for 12 years double down on the thing that has continued not to work. Like,
yeah, isn't that the definition of insanity as well? Expecting different results when doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, well, much like a cult situation, when people start doing that, you have to wonder who's actually benefiting from it. In the case of UK politics, it's the wealthy donors who finance the Tory party. In the case of American politics, it's the wealthy donors who finance both parties. And in the case of in the case of religion, it can be people who crave power, control,
Mm,
there can be sexual gratification,
yeah,
um, ego stroking for those who get to be visible and in charge, um, and sometimes a little of all the above.
exactly. Totally agree. I think, and I think that's what I'm really interested in, particularly in the book, is exploring that phenomenon of of dogmatism, of that rigidity of viewpoint that is just completely just closed and inflexible and kind of just impervious to evidence that goes against their view or goes against goes against their worldview, if I can put it like that. And I think that's as I say, I think that does kind of define our era now in many ways. I think that there's a lot of dogmatic um, um, a lot of dogmatic positions that people hold, and I see a lot of unwillingness to kind of tolerate different points of view, if I can put it that way. Because I also teach philosophy, and that's one of the things that we really strive to kind of ingrain in our students is just being willing to be open-minded and consider and think critically and wonder if actually, oh, what if I'm wrong? Is something I think which I think I notice in society today is something I think we're struggling with a bit, is the ability to kind of just consider, oh, what if I've got this wrong? What if I'm not seeing this correctly? What if I don't have all the facts? Because it was incredibly humbling for me to uh, as somebody who was a convinced Mormon, just utterly convinced that I was in the one true church. And it it was very, very it was humbling to realize that I was wrong, and that I had invested my whole life into something that
I'm sorry, any
yeah.
religion that starts off with haberdashery is going to have some problems. Like, let's just put that out there. When a religion requires exquisite haberdashery, you know you've got issues.
Yeah.
Like,
And I think so. Yeah, I think that's something as well that I'm playing on a bit as a theme in the Gods Who Want to Die is just trying to kind of satirize, make fun of, take a shot at, yeah, um, those sorts of uh, bloody-minded, closed-minded individuals. And I hope it, I hope it, I hope it succeeds in doing that. It's a very dark book. It's a horror book, and so I hope that there is in places. I hope there is a comedic tone at times. If there isn't, then I've failed. And I hope it's not just a kind of a bloodbath, from page to page. I did intend and hope for there to be some humor in it, in the storytelling as well.
yes, well, and you also it was also a bit satirical as well, which I think keeps things fun and light.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly. That's what I really enjoy myself in not only the books that I read, but in the movies and TV shows. I think it's really important to, particularly if you're exploring very dark themes. I think it is really important to have some kind of meta awareness, some room for comedy, um, is really crucial.
Yes. Well, let's get into process. What
Yeah.
inspired you to start writing this book, and how did it come together? And tell us a little bit about how you get from idea to page.
Yeah. Well, it's actually my second book, um, but it's the book that is the most personal to me. Obviously, as I've said, drawing heavily on my own experience of leaving um, a high demand religion, or a cult, if you want to define Mormonism in those terms. But my process um, is is quite consistent. What I tend to do is I'm a huge true crime fan, and when I find true crime stories that um, really fascinate me or really impact me, or actually most of the time terrify me, um, I try to kind of use those true crime stories as prompts for ideas. And I then start to combine those true crime elements with supernatural concepts, or again, even drawing on themes from philosophy and ethics. So yeah, that's my process. That's how I wrote my first book, which I haven't published, um, but hope to at some point. And that's definitely how the Gods Who Want to Die came about, was by being heavily impacted, particularly by three true crime stories, two of which are just so awful. I don't want to really go into them, because I want to keep the tone of your podcast, light um, and not a complete downer for listeners. But they were two, they were two true crime stories that were just so horrifying. And I don't know about you, but I think I've seen this with other horror fans, and I've often had friends ask me, why do you like horror so much? Why do you like such disturbing content? And um, my answer tends to be that well, that's because I am kind of scared by things and disturbed by things. That's kind of my way of really kind of encountering them, or confronting them might be a better word. And so yeah, when I come across some true crime incidents that have either really kind of affected me, they oftentimes become the kind of um, the fertile soil out of which my own original story comes about. And so that's what has happened with all of my writing, and with the third book that I'm writing now. Again, that has also been its origin has come from a true crime story. So yeah, I feel like I'm rambling a bit, but yeah, that's
No,
that's that's
well,
how I write.
no problem. I'm happy to save you. Um, I guess I was reminded of that. I was on a well, I wasn't on, but I was participating in this group of creative people, and this guy had this um this horror novel that he was wanting to do, and he wanted to make it into a movie, and there was some financing for that, and possibly some distribution for that. And so we were all kind of very excited. And I remember because I was living in Denver at the time, and he lived way super far south. It was like a pain in the ass to get down there. Um, it was kind of like, it was like in British terms, it's kind of like, oh yeah, like I live in Bristol, and I'm gonna go see this guy in Manchester. Too far.
Yeah.
That was like the distance you had to cover. It was insane. And uh and so and his whole like thing was to make it, as dark and gritty as possible, and the person who does all the horrible things kind of never gets his comeuppance and all this sort of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, true crime though is very popular right now, especially
it
for
really
women,
is, isn't
which I
it?
don't understand. My lady is loves. I'm like, why is every girl I know like they're incessantly finding out all the ways to kill people, murder people, get killed, get murdered, all this type of thing, and I'm kind of like, that's not natural. Like
It's so,
that's
it's so true though, isn't it? It's an explosion of true crime. I've noticed it as well. It's incredibly popular.
Yeah, I mean, some of
Um,
it's really, I mean, it was really fascinating. There's some YouTube drag queens who live in Bournemouth, and every year they do a Grim Tales of Bournemouth. And this year they
okay.
were doing the towns around Bournemouth. They were in Poole and other places around. And some of them are fascinating. Somebody was kidnapped or someone was killed in front of this garage and all this type, and nobody ever found out why. Some of them are quite fascinating. And I mean, in this country, we have a program called Dateline. That's all they cover is like spouse murder. It's like, they were living the perfect life until she started poisoning him with arsenic, or usually it's the guy who kills. So it's usually kind of like until he
Yes,
had an affair and decided to slash his wife to death, like,
it
all this type
is
of thing. Yeah, it's a very odd, there's a certain macabre fascination. It's like a car wreck you can't look
totally.
away, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly right. It
So
is. It is. It's deep. It's deep rooted, isn't it? And I think it again. I think it comes out of. Um, I think it comes out of fear. I think it's people have this innate fear that it could happen to them, and it does. Yeah, it drives this intense curiosity. Well,
yeah.
that's certainly true in my case, where
Yeah.
true crime is concerned. So yeah,
Yeah. Do
that's
you
how
like
I
to
write.
write do you like to write longhand? Do you like to type? Um, how do you
Um,
what's your method?
yeah, I I tend to use my phone a lot, and just
Oh,
typing in.
guilty. Oh my God, I write on my phone so much. Oh my God. Especially in
So I
bed.
tend,
I'm always, yes, always.
yeah, I'm always noting things down in my phone. I don't want to ever lose anything. Um, and I tend to um, I think this is quite typical of most writers. I tend with the first draft to just go with it, to just run with it, um, and have a kind of scaffold of a plan, and then see what happens. And then with the second draft, really get down to it in terms of um, research and trying to improve the quality of the writing. But I'm really slow, so it's taken me 6 years to write The Gods Who Want to Die, and it took me 6 years to write my first book as well. So yeah, um, it's quite a painstaking process,
Well, that's good. I
but
mean, we won't have
one
you
I
back
enjoy.
until 2029, but that's okay.
It was one I hugely enjoy. I mean, I used to write music, and so I've always been creative. But when I discovered writing, for me, it was it was just this incredible realization that through creative writing, you can just engage yourself on so many levels creatively, um, that I hadn't I'd never experienced before. And so I think, yeah, just the whole getting just consumed in a world that you're creating um, is yeah, it's just a pure joy for me. I wish I could do it faster, and I wish I could. Like a lot of writers out there, I wish I could get. I wish I could get the attention of the people who have the power to take your work and get it out there. Um, but no, it's an absolute joy to write. Um, I only wish I had started sooner.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think a lament of everything that we do. I think a lot of people wish they had started, had started sooner. I wish I had started later. I did not intend to be writing at this stage of my life. I didn't think I would start doing creative writing until I was well into my 40s.
Really? What
Yeah,
do you
but
mean?
well,
What do you mean when you say you wish you'd started later? What do you
I
mean?
so I had kind of wanted to be a writer from when I was in high school.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I had already, read a bunch of writing books, and I had done some short story rewrites of an old time radio show I used to like. Um, and there was the show was set in San Francisco in the 1930s, and it was called Candy Matson. So I did a fanfic of that called Ginny Mason. And
Mm,
and that was the first thing I ever kind of like wrote. And I figured out at a very young age there was no money in creative writing. And so I went into freelancing and business writing and marketing and copywriting, and that's what I kind of wanted to do. And it wasn't until and I went to college, and then the recession happened, and I got involved in this magazine, which was the second magazine I've been involved in, a politics magazine. I had worked in politics, I'd worked in the state senate in Colorado and all this type of thing.
right.
And so I was over there doing all of that stuff.
Okay.
And when the second magazine I was working on collapsed um due to theft, I needed some way to process that.
Wow.
And so I started writing about it in order to kind of process what had happened.
Yeah.
Um and I found that I had what had always been a struggle for me before wasn't anymore.
Mm,
And I think part of it was just age and maturity. I was freshly 25 when that happened.
right.
Um and um and so I started working on what would become my first novel, Cast Iron. Um,
Right.
and I started, and I went and I wrote screenplays with one of my film producer friends and all this type of thing. And, I was freelancing a little bit, living on nothing, like literally like, $20 a day, maybe. I was living in my parents'
Right.
basement, doing those. So I was kind of like, oh, I have gas and can afford a hot dog for today. Great. Let's go write a screenplay. Um, and in fact, at one point, my producer buddy, we were selling off his comic book collection, and that's how we were making money, was
Right.
selling off comics. And all this sort of thing. And then I moved to Seattle to write, and I started the first iteration of this show called The Cameron Cowan Show that later became The Cameron Journal. Um, and went from there. But I had never I that's why I worked at magazines and did all these other things, was because I didn't anticipate, writing books at this age, at this time, all this type of thing.
Sure.
Yeah,
I
and then I
see.
just I just finished my creative arts MFA in February.
Oh,
So yeah, so things kind of took a different turn
awesome.
than I anticipated. So yeah, I think most people do think they wish they had started sooner. I'm probably one of the only people
Yeah.
who wish I'd started later.
Well, I
Because
like how you put it, that you wrote to yeah, you wrote to kind of process what you were experiencing at the time.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I had never gone through working in a startup for 2.5 years and someone walking away with $30,000 and collapsing our business. That
it's
had never, and
awful.
I was, and the other thing is, I was so young. It happened the weekend of my 25th birthday.
Goodness me.
Yeah, like I left the office on Friday, and by Monday, I had no job, no business, no nothing, and everything
Wow.
was gone.
Wow.
Yeah, when my life happens, it happens very quickly. And it was almost like the time I got fired, didn't pass a test to get into business school, and had an offer rescinded to join an IT company in the same day. That all happened
Wow.
in like that's how my life goes. When everything happens, it happens in like 2 hours. And then
Damn.
yeah.
Did you ever
And
hear about Chuck Palahniuk?
oh yeah.
Yeah, did you ever hear what happened to him? Something quite similar. He lost millions of dollars through theft. He found out that his agent at the time, was ripping him off.
Hmm.
And so he lost a huge amount of royalties that should have gone to him. Sorry, you just made me kind of think
No,
about
I'm gonna go read about
him.
that after this because I didn't know.
He's
I'm gonna go read about that because I didn't
he's
know.
he's 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 my favorite author, so that's why I
That's a
made
good one.
the
That's a good
connection.
one. I'm a strong Jack Kerouac Truman Capote stan, and that's funny
Okay.
because they hated each other. Like yeah, like it's yeah, that would yeah, Capote literally called Kerouac typing. He's like, that's not writing, that's typing. Um and but I love them. I love them both for different reasons. Um
Sure.
but yeah, no, but that's a good one. That's a good one to pick. Chuck's a very, I think his work is very misunderstood. I
You
don't think
do?
people I don't think people it's kind of like Dave Foster Wallace. I don't People take it too literally and too seriously, not
Yeah,
realizing he's lampooning that thing.
exactly.
It's like Fight
Yes, yeah.
Club. People take Fight Club super seriously. It's like
Yeah.
no, 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 it's
No.
the opposite. The opposite of that though. Like the
Yeah.
reverse of what that thing you're feeling, but the opposite of that. Like
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah, people don't, and I don't think people realize, you're not supposed to envy the villain. Like that's not the person you're
Mm,
supposed to like, sort of thing. And I think it's
mm.
and this you see this in TV all the time. Like, there's a popular TV show called Mad Men, and it's like
Yeah, yeah. Love that show.
Don Draper's not the hero.
No, he's not a
Just
good guy.
FYI, no, he's not a good guy. Like just FYI, like, but though there are people that are like, and that's what I think with Palaniuk you have that problem of yeah you got, but the reverse of that, like he's trying to get you to see things from it, and so I think he's very
Mm,
misunderstood. So,
mm.
but an excellent choice for favorite writer that gets you 10
Oh,
points
I think
from
he's
me for
wonderful.
sure.
Yeah, he's a wonderful writer. I love he and Bret Easton Ellis are my two go to
I
favorite authors.
love Bret Easton Ellis. I was so sad when he quit doing his podcast because I listened to it religiously.
Really, I
Um,
haven't listened to it very much. I should do, but
he did it for 3 years between like 20, I want to say 14 and maybe 2017.
okay, and he stopped now,
Um,
has he?
he has stopped, but it's still on Apple
Ah.
Podcasts. It's still out there. He just doesn't do any new episodes. So if you want to go listen to
Ah.
the old ones, feel free. It's really good.
I'm
Um,
sure it is. I'm sure it is. I've recently finished his latest book, um, The Shards, which
yes.
was really good, really good book. Very very different. It almost, for me, it didn't quite read like a Bret Easton Ellis book in a way. It didn't quite have the same sort of trademark style, but it was a brilliant story. And
That happens as writers get older.
Do you think? Yeah,
No,
it was
if
weird.
you read if you have someone who's been prolific enough to have books over a course of their life,
Yeah,
that is set of people towards the end. He's in his early 60s now, you know.
yeah,
And you'll find the later stuff is very different than the early stuff.
interesting,
There's a
interesting. So
whole
different. I thought.
yeah, been a whole debate online about when is the ideal time for writers, what time of their life is really good, and people will say,
Mm,
late 20s, early 30s, that's when the good stuff. Say they do the same thing with filmmakers. The first 10 years is good, and then
yeah,
the next 20 may not be so great. And with writing, you'll find the voice changes over time, and I think that's age and
yeah. That's
experience.
so interesting because I mean, I can't I can't wrap my head around how he wrote Less Than Zero at he was 21, I think, when
Yeah.
he published his first book, and I can't wrap my head around how that how that came out of the mind of a 21-year-old.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
mean that's no, I mean but that kind of makes him
Staggers me.
unique. No, that makes him
Yeah,
unique. Very rarely do you get good writing out of young people.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think Fran Lebowitz is entirely right. Good writing comes from life experience, you know.
Mm,
And that was true in my life. I went through a lot. I worked in the state senate. I worked at a politics magazine, got unceremoniously fired from that for the stupidest reason ever. And you then went through, fashion and nightlife and being in this business, losing everything and coming out of
mm.
that. It took me all of that to get to the place where I could actually write. And
Yeah,
even and
yeah.
even now, I'm currently editing my thesis project for my MFA, which will be my next book called The Sweetgrass Saga. Um, it's a sweeping Southern Gothic in the antebellum period, and it's very different. If you read Cast Iron and read this, you'll be like, "What happened to you?" A lot. I finished Cast Iron in 20. I finished the first draft in 2015.
Okay.
Um, and it's just, the way I do things is different. The way I phrase things is different. It's been a long time, I came up
Yeah.
with the idea for that book when I was 19 years old. Um, and a lot has happened, and I've written a lot of other things in the meantime. I've read a lot of other
Mm,
things, and I think that all contributes to a change. J.R.R. Tolkien's the same thing. If you go read the rest of
mm.
the Lord of the Rings books and then go read the Silmarillion, it's so
Right.
different.
Right.
And there are people that only have read that and only like that, don't care for the other four books.
Mm.
And there are some people who've read all five and love all five. I mean, so I think that happens with writers over
Yeah, it's
time.
very interesting. Yeah, it is very interesting to see those sorts of changes. And I mean, I'm not suggesting for a moment that in Brett's case that it's a change for the worse. Not by any means. I love the Shards. Really good book. I just couldn't fathom that it was the same writer. It was just so different. But yeah,
Yeah,
as
I
you
mean
say,
that's no, I mean,
people change.
yeah, I think that's the great thing about following someone through their career,
Yeah,
who
yeah,
writes literature like that. I mean, the genre authors tend not to change very much. Although even like John Grisham, his books are different now than they used to be, and I've read several dozen of those. One
right.
of my favorite World War II spy authors, I didn't like his last book because it didn't have that special thing that it used to have,
Sure.
I could
Yeah.
tell. I'm like, especially as a writer, I'm like, oh, you were on a publisher deadline because I mean, I'm reading this. It's a World War II spy novel set in Paris. I've been to Paris, and I'm sitting here trying to imagine myself in the shoes of your main character. I've literally been to Paris, and I'm struggling. to put myself, and he's
Yeah.
it's Alan First. He's a hardcore genre. I mean, that's what he does, is he does interwar World War II spy novel. Like, that's his thing. Um,
Right.
and they're just like, when I started reading him when I was in high school, and when I had been nowhere and done nothing, and it was like this whole, I mean, I would stay up till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning reading it because it was a whole other world. And so
Wow.
I hadn't read a lot of fiction in my mid to late 20s. And so I was trying to get back into reading. And so I picked one up, and the dialogue was not, the dialogue was pro forma, the descriptions were not there. There was no sense of setting and scene.
Right.
And
Right.
it was really sad. But I mean, that can
Uh,
sometimes happen with the genre authors, as they get under contract to produce a book a year. And publishers will put it out because people will buy it. It prints money, especially someone like him who's well known, very popular. He's,
yeah.
that when you get to that stage, you're just printing money at that point. So quality has a precipitous, decrease.
Yeah.
But even within
Yeah.
people who write fine literature, it is fascinating to see how the work changes over time. And I think that's life.
Definitely.
That's
Mm,
living. You
yeah.
know, things happen, things change, world events happen, and
Mm,
literature changes,
yeah.
um a novel that was very popular in 1895 would not sell nearly as well in 1925. Why is that, you
Mm.
ask? Well, there was a world war in between. We killed 10 million people. That's, I mean, it's the same break between the interwar years and World War II. I mean, when you have
Mm,
something traumatic like that, culture
yeah.
changes, film
Yeah.
changes, books change, radio, television, movie. I mean, all of these things, change precipitously. Um, that's
Yeah.
why I'm patiently waiting for literature about the pandemic to come out. We're about starting to get far away from it enough now.
Oh, you think? Okay.
It will start the books about it will start to come out, and it will
Yeah,
start
that's
to
interesting.
influence literature and all this type
Yeah.
of thing. And it's yeah, I it doesn't affect my work as much because I right now I have a bunch of historical fiction stuff queued up.
Okay.
But I have a couple modern things where I really have to think about, yeah, like, it's even like pre and post 9/11, you
Mm,
have, all, things change, the look of things, changes your, when you watch old TV programs and see the Twin Towers in the establishing shot of New York, it's like a
yeah.
constant reminder, all this type
Oh
of thing.
gosh, like in the Sopranos, the intro
Yes.
the Sopranos, and you see, yeah, it's really haunting. Yeah, when you see the Twin Towers.
Yeah, there's tons. There's a old mystery show with Angela Lansbury called Murder She Wrote, and in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
latter season, she's living in New York, so they have tons of like stock establishing shot footage at the front of the show.
Yeah.
So it happens a lot, then, because and they use you can tell they bought CBS bought one 30-second of stock footage, and they just keep using the same one every single time.
Mm,
um yeah, things like that, and that changes, that changes everything,
mm.
even, sometimes the change of an institution. Like, I'm still not used that Queen Elizabeth is dead. Like, we have a
Yeah,
king now. What
I
the
know.
hell? Like,
It's crazy, isn't it?
yeah, like, it's been a year. I'm still not used to that. Like,
Yeah, I'm the same. I was at with my friend. I'm a big NFL fan,
yeah.
and my friend and I we went to watch an NFL game at London Wembley Stadium
Mhm.
back in a few weeks back, and yeah, I still could not. I just it was so jarring to hear "God Save the King" as our
Yeah.
national anthem. It was
I know. I'm
just
still,
really
and
bizarre.
well, and now especially like because her reign was so long,
Yeah,
like there will come a time when we'll have to explain to people, like in old movies, when they say the queen, no, that's a very particular person. Like, she was not just a queen, she was the queen. She was so popular. You just said the queen, and everyone knew exactly who you were talking
Yeah,
about. Like,
yeah.
and it's just so, I'm just still not used to it. I'm just still not used to it yet. God Save the King. What is that? King Charles the Who? Never heard of him. Like, it's like I'm but that's something where, from now on, we're going to have to talk about, the king, not the queen.
Yeah.
Like, so
I'm in the same boat.
yeah, like it's just, so even something like that is like, and it changes everything.
Yeah.
There was a before and then an after, you
Mm,
know. Um, and especially when you have something that was around for so long and was a part of people's lives for so long, and then that thing changes
yeah.
or goes away, then it just kind of ripples out into the world. It has a
Mm,
weird way of doing that.
mm.
So, well, that was a very long speech that had nothing to do with your book, and I apologize for that.
Not at all. No, it's really interesting to talk to you. No,
Yeah.
and it's interesting to think about, yeah, about how authors evolve and how interesting it is to identify those changes in their style and tone and yeah. So no,
Yeah,
interesting stuff.
it's a, I mean, it's just kind of, I mean, I imagine, leaving the church for you was a before and after. There was your life before, and I imagine your life now is very different.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it's it's a very similar. I went through a similar thing. I grew up evangelical and left the church when I was 18.
Mm,
And by left I really mean I was thrown out. But but there was, a before, and I was like, sheltered, homeschooled, very conservative, very Republican, and then
yeah.
there was life afterwards. So and it's a very difficult, thing, because when you try to tell people, I don't know if you find this with Mormonism, but like you try to tell people like, oh, here's how I grew up and here's what was normal for us and all this type of thing, and people look at you like you're Cerberus with three heads.
They really
um
do. Yeah.
yeah, and I was speaking to my girl the other day, and like, as a child of lifelong Democrats who are hippies and, never really darkened the door of a church seriously. And I'm kind of like, yeah, we had a box on our TV to automatically edit out the curse words. And she's like, what planet were you living on? I'm like, homeschooled, sheltered, Republican, and very conservative. That was the planet. Like,
Yeah.
where people prided themselves on not having a TV in their home and all this type of thing, and that was
Mm,
um a normal thing. And that's, I think, the hard part about coming out of something like that is
mm.
there are whole swaths of your life that are unrelatable to other people who didn't grow up that way. Like, I'm so
That's
glad
so
for my
true.
friends that also grew up that way and left, because they get it, like they
Yeah.
understand. And I have
Yeah.
tons of people in my life that are just kind of like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, never mind, don't ask, let's move on.
No, it's very similar for me. I've got some really good ex-Mormon friends who can relate to what it's like and where I'm at and that, like you mentioned, that big um watershed transitional moment in your life and the effect that it has, the before and the after. So it's good. I've got some good friends who've kind of gone through the same sort of um, life transition. But you're right. To people who have got no experience of being raised in a very conservative, repressive, quite controlling community and group, yeah, it's kind of baffling for them to try to empathize and and understand what it must be like to leave that. Um, and yeah, you either get people who um, who are just kind of quite dismissive of it, or you get people who can be just really genuinely curious and interested and wanting to sincerely understand what the experience was like. So yeah, I can relate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is it no, that is, and I imagine in a country like Britain, which is
Yeah,
very unchurched,
indeed.
except for, maybe you go to the nice service down at the Anglican because it's Christmas and why the hell not? Um, uh, I imagine it's probably, I mean, at least in this country, we are still very religious in this country. So it's
Yeah,
not so weird to say, oh, I grew up religious. Like, I mean, we have Utah. Oh, we have a whole state ruled by religious people. Like, all this other thing. I mean, we have the Amish who is still cosplaying like
yeah.
it's 1850. And we're just kind of like, well, put a sticker on your buggy and we'll let you do that. Only in America. And all this type of thing. I mean, but I imagine in Britain it must be way harder because
Yeah,
people are so kind of by decades now distant from all of that, so to grow up
exactly.
that way is like it makes you just stand out even more.
Yeah, definitely. And it was yeah, it was tricky um growing up and feeling so very different from my friends at school as a Mormon in the UK. Um but yeah, it's a strange thing to reflect on because when I was in it and really believed it, um, it was a pretty happy life. Um, and then I guess around 2012, 2013, really kind of when the internet started to become what it is now, there's just this mass influx of information because it actually wasn't in terms of information it wasn't quite like that if you think back to kind of 2005 era, but
No, you really had to
yeah,
seek
around
stuff out because we didn't have social media yet.
exactly,
We
yeah.
weren't infinitely scrolling, we weren't doom scrolling. I mean, that
Yeah,
wasn't a thing yet.
but what I started to find out through access to information on the internet was was the decisive factor. Yeah, that was the thing, and and yeah, I've watched lots of friends go through the same process, and then having the same fallout in their life. Um, so a pattern I've seen a lot with ex-Mormons is they leave the church and lots of their friendships disintegrate or their marriages deteriorate and lead to divorce. And yeah, lots of things to contend with when you choose to leave a group like that. Um, it's such an all-consuming way of life, and to leave it is, yeah, to kind of, well, to literally um, start a whole new life for yourself,
Yeah,
um,
that's the
which
hardest part.
is
People don't realize is when you leave these things, it's like you've lost all your friends, all your support network, sometimes part of your family,
yep.
um, part or all of your family.
Mm,
And it's really starting over from zero,
it
and in some
is,
cases,
yeah.
like, it can even be employment, living situation, because a lot here in this country, a lot of Mormons own businesses and work for other
So
Mormons.
true.
So
Yes,
like
so
if
true.
you leave, like you will have to change house, change job,
Yeah,
all this sort of
yeah.
thing. And um it's it's it is its own, it's very freeing, but it's its own trauma.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I had a close friend who, I think it would have been a few years after I'd left. He went through the same faith crisis journey, and he told his wife that he no longer believed and he didn't want to attend anymore, and she very promptly very promptly divorced him. So there's that factor as well. I've seen that it's such a huge thing to do, and the impact can be just colossal. And I think, my way of kind of dealing not only with my own experience, but also watching what it was like for other people, my friends, and not even people that I know, but just other Mormons elsewhere in the world. I think I really used all of that as a source for ideas in terms of the gods who want to die. And it's very much a book that, like I said earlier, has a satirical tone, but it is also a book that is pretty angry. So I think, while I'm trying to keep the tone light in the podcast interview with you, it's it is a book that's got a lot of rage running through it, and yeah, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but
no. I appreciate that. No, I definitely, I think you go through all the stages of grief.
Oh yeah, that's
you
it.
leave
Yeah, you
something
put it
like
right.
that. Yeah, it's no. I think you definitely do, and so I'm not surprised that that's a component of the work. But so we reached the point of the show where we do plugs, and so let people know where they can buy the book and where they can find you online.
Sure. So you can get the book on Amazon and on Goodreads, and I haven't got an audiobook version yet, but it's in the pipeline. I'm on Instagram, and on I don't know. We're still not sure what we're calling it now. Are we calling it Twitter or X or both?
I still call it Twitter. I refuse to participate in Elon Musk's ego stroking.
I don't really get the X thing, but yeah, I'm on Twitter as well. So I'm out there. Luke McCamley, and
excellent.
The book is one I hope that would interest not only people who kind of have the interests that we've talked about today in terms of religion, the occult, and things of that nature, but I hope as well it would be a book that would interest casual readers who just enjoy a story that's got lots of twists, is very narrative driven, and I hope it's a book that would appeal to any just pure horror fans of horror literature. So yeah, it's out there, and looking for people to read it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.